Доброго дня, шановні колеги та колежанки. Рада вітати вас на лекції пані Крістіни Ласт, наукової співробітниці Інституту Алана Тюрінга в Лондоні. Лекція пані Крістіни присвячена BigData у міських дослідженнях. Я вам дякую, що ви доєдналися до нас цього п'ятничного дня. Мене звати Тетяна Водотика, я програмна координаторка Центру урбаністичних студій. Промодерую для вас сьогодні цю лекцію. Кілька слів про те, чому і завдяки кому вона стала можливою. В першу чергу, ця лекція є складовою і відбувається в рамках запуску нової магістерської програми, яка називається «Урбаністика та просторове планування». І ця магістерська програма стартувала цьогоріч, цієї осені, на факультеті урбаністики та просторового планування в Київському національному університеті будівництва та архітектури. І ми сподіваємося, що ця лекція стане першою ластівкою подібних лекцій і для студентів і студенток університету, і також для широкого загалу з різних тем, присвячених Urban Studies взагалом. Також я маю подякувати нашим партнерам, які підтримують Центр урбаністичних студій. Це фонд імені Гайнріха Бьолля, Бюро Київ, Україна, який підтримував також запуск зазначеної магістерської програми, а також програму імені Фулбрайта в Україні. І зараз я передам слово пані Джесіці Зехович, яка є директоркою програми академічних обмінів імені Фулбрайта, завдяки чому, власне, ця лекція стала також можливою. Пані Джесіка, you're welcome, please.
Дуже дякую. Доброго дня всім колегам, фулбрайтцям і друзям. Це прекрасний темат. And it's a great pleasure for me to be here and to hear all of your ideas. Greetings from Kyiv, and we hope that you will come and visit us here at some point, and we hope to come out to wherever you are in different regions, different cities. We have this year 17 Fulbrighters from the US in Ukraine and almost 40 Fulbrighters from Ukraine in the US. We are celebrating our 75th anniversary this year worldwide. Fulbright is a great program that has been through a lot, so even the pandemic will not stop us. And you can also see our office is partnered with IIE, Institute for International Education, which is a very large NGO based in New York and has a lot of opportunities also for artists. So get onto their website if you're interested. Thank you for partnering with us today, and good luck to all of you.
Дякую, пані Джесіка. І перш ніж я передам слово пані Крістіні, я скажу кілька технічних моментів. Якщо ви не розумієте англійської мови, вам потрібен переклад, будь ласка, на нижній панелі Zoom оберіть португальську мову. Там, де у вас є чат, реакції, учасники, там є також можливість обрати португальську мову, і ви будете чути синхрон українською мовою. На час викладу пані Крістіни Ласт у вас буде вимкнена і камера, і мікрофон, ви не зможете ні увімкнути самостійно. Якщо вам потрібно буде поставити питання, ви зможете це зробити наприкінці викладу. Будь ласка, через меню реакції оберіть підняти руку, і організатори, і технічний персонал увімкне вам можливість говорити, і ви зможете поставити своє питання і прокоментувати. Також наша подія не транслюється у Фейсбуці, але вона, ви бачите, відеозапис лекції буде доступний на YouTube-каналі Центру урбаністичних студій трошки згодом. Okay, so my privilege now is to pass the word to Kristіna Last to thank her again for the pleasure for us to hear her today. Christina, you're welcome, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you to the Center of Urban Studies for inviting me to give this talk. And also thank you Fulbright Ukraine for hosting today's lecture online. I really kind of personally admire the Fulbright program and the ability for it to offer international education globally. And I've actually applied to a Fulbright grant this year to study at MIT. And so I'm really excited in getting more involved with the Fulbright community. And hopefully we can continue this transnational relationship with both Ukraine, the UK, obviously, where I'm from, and the US for my study there next academic year. So I'll go ahead and share my screen and give you an introduction to myself and the talk that I'll be giving today. Please feel free, as we mentioned earlier, to raise your hands. And hopefully we'll be able to take your questions in either English or Ukrainian, and the instructions on hearing the translation were given earlier, but please see the interpretation tab on the bottom of your Zoom window and set that to Portuguese if you would like to hear in Ukrainian. But keep to English if you would like to hear my English presentation. Okay. Okay, so I'm showing my screen now. I hope you guys are all able to see. So today I'm going to be giving a presentation on analyzing urban form using big data. And as a kind of subsection to the lecture, I will actually introduce some technologies, specifically technologies written in the programming language Python, that allow you to interrogate geospatial data sets for urban data science analysis. And we will go into what those terms mean within the presentation. First, I'll give you a little bit of a background to my journey to becoming a data scientist, but also a little bit about my experience along the way. And then we'll talk a little bit broadly about what urban form means and how urban forms can be represented through geospatial data and geospatial big data. And then we'll move into the section on using Python or open source technologies to produce urban data science analysis. And in that section, I will draw on an example of some small analysis that I've done using these technologies for urban locations within Ukraine. Let me just give you the introduction to the course before I go a little bit into my background. So urban planning and urban morphology, so how urban environments change, have relied on analytical cartography, that is the ability to represent information on a map, but also visual communication tools for centuries. And these illustrate spatial patterns, they propose different designs, they compare alternative designs, and ultimately they engage the public in urban life. However, these classic urban forms and the visualizations around them, such as Giambattista Noli's iconic map of Rome, which we'll look at, they have compressed physical urban complexity into information artifacts, and these are commonly known as maps. However, today we can go beyond the process of making maps, and we can enhance these traditional workflows via user-generated content and harvested data from online information management. and new spatial technology platforms, and one of which we'll discuss is called Openstreetmap, and other big data sources can offer new lenses to understand and evaluate and monitor the changing urban form. So today my lecture will build on this framework of understanding urban culture in urban planning, and I'll introduce new computational data science techniques to do that. More specifically, I'm going to talk about workflows using Python and a package called OSM-NX. And this uses data from OpenStreetMap to examine street network patterns, orientations, configurations, and we'll look at different study sites around Ukraine, and we'll consider what those reveal about the urban fabric. So that's the introduction to the talk, and I'll give a bit of my background now. So I'm Kristіна Last, and my common thesis within my work is to use data to understand our built environment. So officially I studied a geography bachelor's at the University of Bristol, and that was very much focused around using large geospatial data sets to understand our urban environment, but also statistical processes on those data sets to understand significant relationships between our built environments and our life outcomes. And so a large piece of research that I did during my academic career at Bristol was to look at how transportation networks, specifically public transportation networks in Los Angeles, actually affected the ability for ethnic minorities in the city to be able to access high income earning job opportunities. And I specifically looked around the communities of Hispanic populations within LA to be able to demonstrate that they were not being serviced by public transit to be able to access high income job opportunities. After my time at Bristol, and also I studied abroad in California. I worked in New York, and I worked on one of the largest construction plans or built environment spatial plans in upstate New York at one of the largest civil engineering firms based in the UK, but had a New York office called Bureau Engineering. And throughout that opportunity, where I was working in New York, I also had the opportunity to work with the University of Harvard, and specifically their graduate design school, to produce a series of lectures on understanding how our streets would be transformed in the next 30 years, and thinking about how technology could make streets much better places for people and pedestrians to exist in the urban realm. After Harvard, I moved back to the UK, and now I work at the Alan Turing Institute. Now, the Alan Turing Institute is the UK's official AI institute, and my role in the Alan Turing Institute is to build artificial intelligence to help solve some of our largest research challenges in the UK. And I focus on projects surrounding the built environment. More specifically, I've been working on a project based in London to build a digital twin, which is a digital replica of the City of London, to be able to model their air pollution. And that takes in a large amount of big data from organizations such as Transport for London and the GLA, the Greater London Authority to understand where people are moving, where traffic is moving, and where does the pollution from traffic intersect with where people are moving and cause higher exposure to pollution concentrations. And so I hope you can see that throughout my career, I've been looking at finding ways in which large data sets, large geospatial data sets can be used using programming and statistical techniques to help understand life outcomes and health outcomes as well. And as well as this, I have also been a lead data scientist at a property technology startup, and that's been using geospatial data to inform how we predict house price modeling in the UK. And and another role that I have most recently worked with is UNICEF, and that was actually building a team of technical team members to model air pollution globally using satellite imagery. So again, another type of geospatial data that we can actually use to infer different spatial phenomena, and that was air quality in this case, as well as in the work that I do at the Alan Turing Institute. Okay, so let's move on to urban form. So I'm now going to talk a little bit about this outside of the context of big data and the history of how urban form has come to now use large data sets. So this is the Giambattista Nolli map that I mentioned in my introduction. Now, Giambattista Nolli, he was an architect in Italy, and he was born in 1701, died in 1756, and he was a surveyor as well. He is best known for the Nolli map, which is the map you see on my slideshow. And this was a map that was composed of 12 copper engravings that measured about almost 2 meters in diameter and 1 meter in height. It was published in a response to a commission by the Pope in order to help demarcate the 14 traditional districts of Rome. And it was by far the most accurate description of Rome produced to date, when the papacy was in full flower. But in fact, this map was used up until the 1970s to make decisions on planning in Rome. So this is the actual demarcation of where buildings would be proposed up until the 1970s. So it's highly detailed. Now, as I said, urban planning and urban morphology, the way in which urban areas change, have relied on analytical cartography, such as the Nolli map, and visual communication tools for centuries. These maps like this illustrate spatial patterns, and they propose new designs, and ultimately they engage the public. So these maps have compressed physical urban complexity into an easily comprehensible information artifact. But this is what a more modern map of Rome looks like. This was actually a map that I took from Openstreetmap, which is the technology, the big data technology that we'll look at discussing in detail today. Now, it may not look as detailed, but this is a much more zoomed out version of a map of Rome. And in Rome, on OpenStreetMap, you'll be able to find every building labeled, every road demarcated, every pavement section demarcated too. So it really contains a large amount of detail about the urban form within Rome. So as I was saying, we can now enhance traditional workflows using this idea of a smart city, the way that we can track and measure and model cities using big data. And I believe we can do this best using user-generated content in an information management context. And user-generated content is often posted to sites like Openstreetmap. New spatial technology platforms such as Openstreetmap offer new lenses to understand, evaluate, monitor, and manage urban form and evolution. And the way that Openstreetmap does this is users can log in and they can click on certain areas of a city and they can report what they're used for, what they look like spatially, so they can draw the perimeters of a certain building, and they can tag that building with certain activities or events associated with it. And those can then become updated when new users join the platform and improve the accuracy of that tagging and mapping technique that was used. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about how Openstreetmap does this and the history of Openstreetmap. So someone called Steve Coast founded Openstreetmap in 2004. So the project is only just over 16 years old. It initially focused on mapping the United Kingdom, and it was a government-run and tax-funded project by organizations like Ordnance Survey, which are a large mapping organization in the UK. Ordnance Survey also created huge data sets, but couldn't distribute them widely or freely. And so in 2006, 2 years after Openstreetmap was first founded, the Openstreetmap Foundation was established to encourage growth, development, and the distribution of free geospatial data, and provide a platform where everybody could use it and share it. Now, as you can see, contributions to Openstreetmap have been growing since its inception in 2004, but since the foundation was first launched in 2006. There is now a worldwide mapping community and an online geospatial information system that has played an increasingly key role in the streams of scholarship, as it provides high quality source of data and a freely available data stream on urban data, such as data on street networks or on other urban infrastructure worldwide. So the project is now no longer about the UK, but you can find high quality open geospatial data from all over the world. And there has been a large user generated content movement within Openstreetmap because of its ability to be a really great truth to understand urban environments globally. And this year, Openstreetmap reached its 100 millionth contribution. So you can imagine just how much content has been shared through the platform to help us understand urban spatial information. So to summarize, in the age of ubiquitous urban data, we need to have computational toolkits to open up an era of worldwide urban form analysis. So not only do we just need to store and collect data about urban environments, which is what Openstreetmap does, but we want tools to be able to use that data to help aid our understanding of urban form. And we also want to use both quantitative and qualitative perspectives to drive urban planning decisions. And today I'm going to talk about one of those toolkits, which is a Python library that helps us understand some of the data within Openstreetmap. But that will predominantly give you the quantitative information. And we always need to marry that with the qualitative information. So that's the opinions and conversations and contexts in which we look at using urban planning techniques. So I'm now going to introduce Python for urban data science. And this will basically look at how do we use these computational toolkits to better understand our urban environments and make decisions in the context of urban planning. So spatial information and our management of that information plays a central role in urban planning. As we've seen from the Nolly map, we need to have a certain system of representation to today where we use open source data to understand our built environment. But all urban and human processes are spatially situated. And that's what makes large geospatial data sets incredible, to be able to have at the hands of policymakers and urban planners. Again, user-generated big data about spatial infrastructure allows us to examine the physical flows of people, of goods, of information through urban space. So today we're going to look at using Python for urban data science. And specifically, I'm going to show you a small project that I did on these 4 locations around Ukraine. So what I did was I took the coordinates of each of these buildings or these famous places in Ukraine. And the coordinates is just a geospatial reference system that allows computers to be able to understand a specific point coordinate on Earth from anywhere in the world. This is also something that Python is able to understand. So when you give OSMNX a library and open source Python package that allows us to understand data from OpenStreetMap, when you give that package these specific coordinates, then it can point you to that location on a map. So if you look at these locations, this is what they look like through OSMNX. You can pull every single individual building from all of these locations with just one line of code. And we can look at the code later if we have time. But these allow us to see so much information about each of the different urban environments in which Ukrainians live. In Kiev, you can see that that's a very close-knit building structure. With large streets in the middle and highly dense urban blocks in which residential and commercial properties sit. In Lviv, we can see a similar grid-like structure, but the blocks are within the radius, so the distance from the specific location, and you get their features. So what are they used for? What is their specific outline? And you can actually form a really interesting perspective of the local context around a point location. And you can do this for anywhere in the world using a coordinate location. So I can select and I can see exactly what buildings exist anywhere in the world using OpenStreetMap. But I might want to know about the rows. And you can also pull down the street network as well. So every single one of these lines and their associated points is a specific network feature in the urban environment. So you can see smaller roads represented by potentially a single line, and each of those will have tags of the size of the road it is, what its function is. But you can also see main highways. And as well as this, you can see footpaths marked within urban areas. So when we look back to, for example, this area of dark location in Donetsk, we can actually see that this is actually full of small pathways and can infer that this would actually be a park and that there are pathways to walk through that park. And so we already get an enhanced understanding of the urban context through both the building arrangement, but also the street network within both. And these are both just two queries that we can make to the specific Python package. So that's the building network. That's also the road network. But can we produce some analysis on those two? So here's just a small piece of analysis that I did on those two pieces of data that we can use and collect from OpenStreetMap. So these are network orientation diagrams. They're really easy to make, and they actually give you an idea of what, how cardinal the street is. So that's how north and south and east and west the city is oriented. For example, the city in this network diagram with the most cardinal network orientation is Donetsk. And this gives you an idea that a large amount of the streets go north to east, and a large amount of the north to south, and a large amount of the streets go east to west. And this gives the idea of a gridded structure. So you would associate a gridded city to be a place that was very centrally planned. Whereas something like Kiev, which has very limited cardinality, streets don't really go north to south, and they don't really go east to west. They go all different directions. This gives you the idea that a city was not centrally planned. It has potentially quite weaving, sweeping streets, which don't have any specific direction. So already I can get an idea just from these diagrams that some cities have a very regularized grid, and some cities have a very irregular organic grid. And that we can then infer has different implications for the type of transportation systems that are able to have. Maybe more cardinal streets can have tramways, which can be running in straight lines, whereas potentially more organic streets would need more buses or vehicles that are able to navigate those highly curved road networks. And we could also infer whether there's a relationship between cardinality and traffic in those cities. But the whole point of these diagrams is to indicate that just through large geospatial data being freely available, and we're able to easily construct queries to pull this data, but also analyze the data, we can actually get an interesting context about the places that which we're exploring just using open source data from OpenStreetMap. So to summarize, through tools of urban morphology and computer science, we can see that spatial information can help us understand how urban areas, how they are designed, how they are organized, and how ultimately space is ordered. And as we've seen, Openstreetmap can provide urban planners like ourselves user-generated big data to be able to perform urban data science workflows automatically. And the rose diagrams are the street network orientation diagrams I just showed you. They compress the complexity of all of those street network orientations, and they help us understand similarities and differences within the spatial ordering of our city's streets. And so they get us to a really good understanding of similar and different urban contexts. And I hope I showed some evidence of that through the 4 cities that I took a look at in Ukraine. So here's some references to follow up on, specifically the first one, which tells you how to use OSMNX. This is the package that I used to query OpenStreetMap, and how to visualize complexity within street networks. And then if you want to understand more about big data and urban morphology, take a look at the final paper. So that is all that I have on the talk, and I'm very willing to spend the next 20 minutes taking questions.
Thanks, Christina, for your lecture. I hope it was interesting for all of us, not just me, just such an introduction to the using of Python in analyzing big data in urban studies. And зараз я звертаюся до шановної аудиторії. Якщо у вас є запитання, будь ласка, в нижній частині панелі у вас є реакції. Там є підняти руку, raise hand, або підняти руку, яка версія Zoom у вас є. Будь ласка, ставте свої питання, ми з адміністраторами увімкнемо вам звук і можливість говорити, і ви зможете, власне, поставити свої питання пані Крістіні. Також наголошую, що запис цієї лекції буде виставлений на Ютубі, на каналі Центру урбаністичних студій, і ви зможете передивитися ще раз цей відеозапис. Так що, будь ласка, якщо є запитання, не соромтеся, ставте їх. Можливо, є питання в пана Алі Мамедова, який є деканом факультету урбаністики та просторового планування, де, власне, і запустилася наша магістерська програма цьогоріч. Рада вас бачити.
Так, навзаєм. Дякую. Доброго дня, пані Крістина. У мене таке питання, оскільки ми займаємось освітницькою діяльністю. У мене таке запитання. Які програми геоінформаційних систем ви б порадили для студентів для вивчення? Це по-перше. І друге питання. Ось у нас є гуманітарний блок, тобто наш факультет займається підготовкою студентів не тільки в urban planning, не тільки в містобудуванні, а й право, ми готуємо будівельне та містобудівне право в напрямі, або політичний менеджмент, тобто розробка правових засад розвитку простору або політичних засад, да? Як розробити політичне рішення для розвитку тих чи інших територій, скажімо так. Скажіть, будь ласка, наскільки корисно було б програмування на мові Python для студентів гуманітарного напрямку? Дякую вам за лекцію, дуже було цікаво. Дякую.
Thank you, Eliza, for the questions. They're both really interesting, really good questions. So for the first one, which was what GIS tools would you recommend? I would say that Python is definitely the easiest way to use big data to generate information about urban areas. The key techniques that and tools that I would use in Python is GeoPandas and Pandas. They are two libraries which help you wrangle or transform tabular data to be able to summarize using statistical techniques. And I hope to work alongside the Center for Urban Studies in teaching some basic tutorials how to use these two libraries with geospatial data. I would also say, as an addition, bringing in Openstreetmap and Python tools like OSM-NX are really useful to be able to form very quick queries and visualization techniques to be able to understand the urban environment. So that's a few of the diagrams that I showed today were generated very easily using OSM-NX. I would say it is hard for non-technical people to use coding languages, and there is open source more GIS tools such as QGIS, which have been used a lot in urban planning schools. These are also built using Python. So you can start in QGIS, start building some plugins in Python for QGIS. But I personally find Python to be the easiest way. And I would really love to engage further with your students to be able to teach a course using Python for urban data science. And then your second question was about how do we engage political scientists and other students in humanities disciplines to use some of these techniques for policy and decision making. Now, again, that's a really hard question because, as I mentioned, you need both the quantitative and qualitative techniques. But there are libraries as well that allow you to crowdsource information from social media like Twitter. And also a lot of the time, Twitter have locations based on where each tweet was sent. And there are really interesting studies, and I can definitely share a few after this lecture, that combine the location of tweets with certain geographic phenomena that can be, why do tourists visit certain areas? So the intersection of both the geospatial and the social media aspect can be really interesting. And I would say that that could be a way that you engage someone from a humanities background in techniques and technologies like open source tools like Python. I hope that answers your question, and yeah, hopefully I can share some of those links after the talk.
Щиро дякую за відповідь. Дуже дякую.
Є ще в нас питання від пана Олексія Викалюка.
Hello. I wanted to ask Christina, so there is one problem with crowdsourced data and OpenStreetMap in particular, that you don't have any guarantees that your data is fresh. As an example of that, right now on OpenStreetMaps, like bicycle infrastructure in Kyiv does not reflect the real situation. How do you address it, and how can you know that your data is good?
Thanks, Alexei, for the question. And yeah, you're right. It's not ground truth. The very nature of it being crowdsourced is you're always going to have people's perspectives, people's biases, input into the information content. And so that's why we see so much of the coverage of Openstreetmap being much more available in the Northern Hemisphere versus the Southern Hemisphere, where a large amount of the technology owners and technology developers are based. What I can say, though, is that no data provider is without their biases. And what we're actually seeing is crowdsourced information is not without biases, but it's also having multiple perspectives input into the source itself. Whereas if you took Google Street Data, you are having one technology company with one or maybe several, but not very many locations around the world. And developers or people employed within those locations, which potentially all have a set of biases that are much more constrained than those of the contributors to Openstreetmap. So I would say that it's not perfect, but you're actually going to get much more coverage, especially of certain developing urban areas by somewhere like Openstreetmap, because the users are from everywhere, and there have been a lot of use cases of Openstreetmap in certain humanitarian environments where potentially they need large open source mapping to happen immediately. A good example of that was in Port-au-Prince just after the 2005 earthquake. They needed a large mapping effort to happen there so they could get resources to hard to reach communities that were very badly affected by the earthquake. Whereas Google does not have the type of that type of coverage. In fact, I don't think they collect any street information about Haiti or Port-au-Prince. So that's just a direct comparison between those two geospatial data providers. But I would say on average, your accuracy is going to be better with Openstreetmap, despite the fact that it's user generated, just because there is much more activity on the platform and much less bias around certain locations, certain perspectives. And I hope that answers your question. And let me know if you know any other great tools for open source and geospatial information.
Дякую. Нагадую, що у вас є можливість, шановні слухачі, ставити питання. І ви можете зробити це в письмовому чаті або підняти руку, і ми увімкнемо вам мікрофон для запитання. Будь ласка, не соромтесь. Ще раз нагадую, що запис цієї лекції буде виставлений з часом на YouTube-каналі Центру урбаністичних студій. Пані Крістіна, можливо, ми попросимо у вас дозволу взяти кілька ваших слайдів для того, щоб підготувати інформацію, для новинну інформацію, таким чином проілюструвати її. Дякую. То ми все ще чекаємо питань від слухачів. Можливо, вони з'являться згодом. Якщо у вас виникли питання пізніше, після перегляду, можливо, відеозапису, ви можете написати їх на сторінку Центру урбаністичних студій у Фейсбуці, і ми їх переадресуємо пані Крістіні. І вона дасть відповідь вже якимось іншим чином, а не зараз у ефірі. Тож, якщо питань немає, не бачу я їх у Фейсбуці, не бачу також піднятих рук, то будемо дякувати ще раз нашій сьогоднішній лекторці, пані Крістіні Ласт з Інституту Алана Тюрінга у Лондоні. Також будемо дякувати фонду імені Гайнріха Бьолля Бюро Київ Україна за можливість провести цю лекцію. Будемо, звичайно, що дякувати програмі академічних обмінів імені Фулбрайта за технічну підтримку цієї сьогоднішньої нашої події. Я буду прощатися, ще раз дякувати пані Крістіні і ще раз дякувати вам за ваш час, за те, що ви долучилися до нашої сьогоднішньої відкритої події. Ще раз нагадую, що лекція буде удоступнена у відеозаписі з часом трохи пізніше. І гарної нам усім п'ятниці і гарних вихідних. Чекаю, це просто знак вдячності.
Thank you very much.